This week on Lewis on the Law, I've got yet another great show for you. I have attorney Alpa Amin on with me, and we're going to talk about the Georgia Asylum and Immigration Network, also known as GAIN.
Welcome to Lewis on the Law.
You are listening to Lewis on the Law. My name is James Lewis, and I have yet another awesome and empowering show for you guys today. I'm so excited. I have Alpa Amin on with me, and she is an attorney, and she is also Director of Legal Services for the Georgia Asylum and Immigration Network. Hey, Alpa, how are you doing today?
How are you? Thank you for having me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's great having you on, and it's really important that we get these kind of issues out and that we talk about your organization, because I think it's very timely, and it may help one or two people out there who are listening right now.
Wonderful.
Okay, so the Georgia Asylum and Immigration Network, we also know it as GAIN. Exactly, what are you guys? What do you guys do? Who are you?
Thank you. So the Georgia Asylum and Immigration Network is a nonprofit organization that provides free legal services to immigrant survivors of crime and persecution.
Okay, that's a mouthful right there. So how does GAIN start out? What's the history of it?
So we started in 2005 as a loose affiliation with the Atlanta Bar Association and several law firms and attorneys who wanted to engage in pro bono practice with some support. So we started with our flagship program, which is the Asylum program, wherein we recruited, trained, and mentored pro bono attorneys from the Atlanta community on how to handle immigration cases.
That's interesting, because right now asylum is kind of a buzzword out there. So people think that asylum is something that's new and just now happening, but you guys have existed for a while. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. We were created and founded in 2005, and we've been engaging in this work, partnering with various organizations and really broadening the scope of our services since that time. Excellent.
So who do you serve? Who are your main clients here?
We have two programs. So we have an asylum program and we have the Victims of Violence program. And both of those programs, we have provided service to over 6,000 men, women, and children from over 118 countries around the world.
118 countries? That's a lot. Of course, I know there's a lot of countries, so maybe it's not so many. So what makes your services unique here?
So GAIN operates on what we call a pro bono model. So our job is to, while we handle a small portion of the cases internally at GAIN through our in-house staff attorneys, the bulk of our work is handled by trained pro bono attorneys from the Atlanta legal community.
Okay, that is a great model, and there are other organizations that do similar things, but not in your specific area. Is that correct?
That is correct. We are one of the few pro bono legal service organization that provides immigration legal services.
Immigration law. It's a huge topic, immigration law. So where do we start here?
Oh, goodness. Well, immigration law, of course, is complex. And I think that is one of the reasons why organizations like GAIN need to exist. It's difficult to navigate. It's informed by multiple different sources. Of course, immigration law is defined by federal statute, the Immigration and Nationality Act. It is also informed by federal regulations, policy guidance, memoranda, administrative decisions, and of course, case law.
That's a lot. And I want to kind of interject this here. I know there's a lot of heated arguments over immigration law right now, and we're not going to get into any of that today. We don't want to go ahead and take sides. This show is really only trying to bring a highlight to an organization that does great work here in the state and maybe address how the law actually works. So how do immigration laws protect survivors of crime?
So for the clients that are served by our organization, there are federal protections through the Violence Against Women Act, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which allow for temporary immigration relief for survivors of crime. And in particular, we're talking about survivors of human trafficking, domestic violence, and sexual assault.
So do you see that most of the people that you serve are women?
Actually, we serve men, women, and children. And so depending on the type of case and whichever program that we're talking about, we could have journalists from the Middle East or from Africa who are fleeing persecution in their country, or women and girls who've been lured to the United States and forced to traffic.
That's something that I hear about a lot, but it just boggles my mind that could actually happen here in the United States. I mean, human trafficking. I mean, it seems incredible to me.
You know, in many ways, it is a complex issue, but maybe not so. I think that trafficking is really a crime of exploitation, and it preys on people's vulnerabilities, and it's preying on people. And so we're talking about individuals who want to earn a living, provide for their families, just have a better life, get an education. And those are the things, unfortunately, that make someone vulnerable to being trafficked.
That is so fascinating. How did you get into this line of work? I mean, do you mind me asking that? Because it just seems like it's a really big subject. It's really in depth, and you deal with it. I mean, I'm a real estate attorney, so I don't deal with any emotional issues. The heaviest emotional issues I deal with are business relationships that go bad usually, and who owns this piece of land, and that's emotional. But what you're talking about, human trafficking, victims of crime, that's extremely heavy.
And I think my personal involvement in this work comes from kind of an understanding of the immigrant perspective, having grown up in a home where my family immigrated to the United States for those very reasons, wanting to have a better life, provide for their children, give them an opportunity to get a college education. But then I also noticed that there were gaps in services, and more so people afraid to come forward to ask for services, even if they existed. And so I think at Georgia Asylum and Immigration Network, the issue presented itself to us. We saw the gap, and we found a way through our Victims of Violence program to fill that void by training volunteer attorneys, teaching them about the issues. And again, we're talking about attorneys who have little to no experience with immigration law, but we have given them all of the information they need to successfully represent our clients.
So you're geared towards being an immigration attorney just from the jump, really?
Interestingly enough, I growing up in the Indian community, I thought immigration was the last thing I'd get into. I used to work for the district attorney in Virginia, and I thought criminal law was going to be my path. But once I saw the critical role that victims of crime play in the process of investigating and prosecuting a case, I realized that I wanted to spend my efforts working with them.
Excellent. So how does immigration status affect victims of crime? I mean, does it affect it? I guess their rights are limited?
Yes. So immigration status is, in the general sense, it gives somebody the ability to stay in the United States, remain lawfully in this country for a period of time. Now, when you don't have immigration status, you're also unable to obtain a work authorization, to be able to get a job, be able to get a driver's license or a Social Security card. So it limits you in many other ways that keeps someone oftentimes in an abusive or exploitative situation.
That's amazing. So there are things that that survivors can't do because of their immigration status. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct.
So how do you guys help with that?
So again, I think helping one of the victims of crime, of course, obtain immigration status opens the door to them being able to apply for a work permit. We work collaboratively with law enforcement. So we're involved pretty early on once someone's been identified as a victim of, say, human trafficking, for example. We are contacted, we meet with our clients, we screen their cases to see what immigration options they have available. At GAIN, we have limited forms of relief that we assist with. We help with a T visa, U visa, VAWA self-petition, and certain other forms of relief. And so once we've identified what their needs are and what they're eligible for, we'll determine how they will be served by our organization.
That is really good stuff. So does anybody qualify for this program? And if anybody who just basically says, I'm an immigrant and I may be a victim of crime, do they just automatically qualify for your help? It seems like your resources would be limited, and that seems like such a big population of people.
Well, thank you for acknowledging that. We are a fairly small organization, but we serve, again, anywhere over 6,000 individuals we've served since our inception, and roughly 500 clients a year. And that means that people who call us, they have the opportunity to be screened for our options. We conduct an income assessment, and then if they qualify for one of the forms of relief that we help with, then we will secure legal representation for them.
Excellent stuff. Okay, so we're at the end of this segment. I want you to give our listeners a little bit of contact information, and maybe even there's a lot of attorneys that listen to this show, so even attorneys who'd like to help and become involved with you, give them some contact information for GAIN and for yourself.
Sure, absolutely. So the best way to find our information is to go to our website, www.georgiaasylum.org. You will find out more about our programs, our staff, and all the wonderful work that we've been doing.
You're listening to Lewis on the Law. My name is James Lewis, and I am your host this week and every week. And once again, this show is not designed to give out legal advice. This show is only designed to bring you information that might help you make an informed decision, might help you know if you have a legal problem or legal issue that can be addressed, maybe even help you find attorneys or services that may help you solve your legal dilemma. Anyways, this is not meant to be legal advice. All my old shows are archived on my website. You can go to jameslewislegal.com and you can go through and you can see all my old shows. You can find attorneys through my show. I gave each attorney and organization that comes on this show the ability to give out their contact information so that it might help you. If you have an idea for this show and you'd like to hear it, go ahead and give me a shout out on my contact page, jameslewislegal.com. You can email me at james@jameslewislegal.com, or you can give me a call at 404-610-0075. When we get back, we're going to talk about human trafficking, heavy subject. You are listening to Lewis on the Law. My name is James Lewis, and I am here to empower you, the listener. And I'd like to let you guys know that this show streams, it not only airs locally here on Biz 1190 AM on Saturday mornings, but we also stream nationally on every single national streaming platform you can think of. iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, you name it. I can't name all the ones. I just named the big ones that I know of off the top of my head. We are also AI compatible. You can go to your AI device and say, hey, Alexa, or hey, Google Play Lewis on the Law, episode 54 with attorney Alpa Amin, and this show will come streaming out of your AI listening device. How about that? Modern technology. Who would have thunk it, right?
Wonders.
It is wonders. Okay, so I have attorney Alpa Amin on with me, and she is the director of legal services for the Georgia Asylum and Immigration Network. And we are talking about GAIN itself. We're not getting into immigration. I mean, we're touching on immigration law, but this show is really focusing on the organization itself. You guys do great work here in the state of Georgia. And when we last left off, we were talking about human trafficking. That sounds to me like a hugely heavy subject, and I can't even imagine dealing with issues like that.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that sometimes it comes as a surprise to many that Atlanta is a hub for human trafficking.
It surprises me because I don't know how it fits into my worldview that actually goes on here.
Right, but I think again, human trafficking is a pretty. There's an explanation for it. It is a crime that preys on people's vulnerabilities. It's an exploitation, and oftentimes it's happening right before us.
Okay, so what makes someone susceptible to human trafficking?
So what we generally see at GAIN are individuals who have come to the United States told that they would be given some sort of employment opportunity, an opportunity to go to college, people who are lured by romance, and then, of course, they arrive in the United States and realize the circumstances are far different than they were promised.
That is amazing. So they're lured by romance. I mean, someone puts out an ad and say, hey, I'll be your husband. I want to marry you. And they bring them here? Well,
not necessarily. Okay. You also see it in the context of young girls who have developed a romantic relationship with someone overseas. And they think they're coming to the United States to build a life with them, to be able to earn, to be able to send back money to their sick parents. And then, of course, when they arrive, they realize that that's not what's being promised.
So is it mostly young women that we see that are victims of this, or are there other groups of populations?
Yeah, I think that's a common misconception. Human trafficking cuts across a variety of different demographics. And so at GAIN, we have served men, women, and children, men who are primary breadwinners who've come to the United States to work on a temporary immigration visa and work in the agricultural industry, people who are trying to make a living, but then are being exploited throughout the process.
Okay, so is this the same as smuggling people over? I mean, trafficking, smuggling. I mean, are they interrelated somehow?
That's a great question.
I mean, because you think of, because I sometimes think of these, I get it from the movies because I'm not that heavily involved in it. But you see these movies where they pack people into this truck and then bring them across lines.
Right. I often ask people if they've seen the movie Taken, and if they, where somebody is forcibly removed from their situation and forced to work in a brothel. And that's not necessarily what takes place. Again, we're talking about people sometimes, and what I would say is that there's a difference, of course, between trafficking and smuggling. And smuggling is more of a crime where there's a facilitation of an entry into a country by someone. Human trafficking is a crime of exploitation. It means that someone doesn't have the free will to come and go as they please. They may have a debt that they have to now pay off. Or someone that they are now accountable to for having helped them.
So when you're talking human trafficking, is it always just sex workers, or is it labor exploitation also?
It's both. And the International Labor Organization, for example, estimates that the majority of trafficking actually worldwide is actually labor trafficking.
Is labor trafficking. Okay, that's interesting. So that people bring people over to work in there. I mean, in the United States, I still have a hard time seeing that Atlanta is a hub of trafficking. So because there's no factories here, or is that what we're talking about here? Bringing them over to work in factories? I think of like China or some other country where there's a lot of industry where that happens.
Right. So labor trafficking can cut across different industries. It could be in the agricultural industry and factories. It can also take place in the form of domestic servitude. So people who are forced to work as a nanny or a housekeeper, somebody inside a home who therefore has limited access to the outside world and isn't easily identified as a victim of trafficking.
That actually made light bulbs pop off in my head, because I know a lot of people who are fairly wealthy, and a lot of times they have people who work for them who are not English speaking, and I'm thinking, is that what you're talking about? I guess it could be. I mean, I would hate to, and the people that I know would hate to think that they are involved in any kind of human trafficking or smuggling or anything like that.
Right, and again, there are certain indicators that we would look for, questions that we would ask somebody if they were to reach out to us for help. We would ask about their work hours, the conditions under which they're working. Do they have access and control over their documentation? Are they able to communicate with their friends, family, or others readily? Those are the kinds of things we'd want to know.
Okay, so that sounds interesting. It seems like, is that like a scheme or definition or something like that? I mean,
so the definition of human trafficking, there are generally speaking two buckets. We're talking about sex trafficking or labor trafficking.
Okay.
But we follow something, it's known as the AMP model. It identifies an action, a means, and then a purpose.
Okay, so that's what it felt like you were getting at. Okay, an action, a means, and a purpose. So define those three things for me.
Sure. So the action can be someone who has harbored another individual, transported them, obtained them. The means is through force, fraud, or coercion, and then the purpose is for the purpose of engaging in commercial sex act or labor services. So a trafficker could be someone who has transported someone fraudulently, told them that they were going to be coming here to work at a restaurant, but they were intending to force them into sex trafficking.
Wow, that is incredible. And it still boggles my mind that Atlanta could be a hub of that. It just seems like, I don't know. I work in Peachtree Center. I come here to Buckhead. I used to work in Buckhead. It just seems very far removed from that. I don't know. It's incredible to think.
Well, and I think the 10 years or so that I've been kind of engaged in this work, I've seen that Atlanta, yes, is a hub, but it is also a transit city.
Okay.
There are people who are brought to the city and then transported to smaller locations.
And to that makes more sense to me, because I can't wrap my mind around the fact that there can be a huge number of human trafficking victims here in Atlanta. I guess I could be wrong, though.
Well, and I think the numbers are deceiving in some ways. And so I think that because the data is so scarce on how many victims there are actually out there, I think it's more important and incumbent upon us to actually go out and make services available, inform people of our resources so that they can understand that there is somewhere they can go if they are experiencing something like this.
Okay, is there any way you can talk about any of your specific cases, or can you not get into that?
I can't get into specifics, but I can tell you that we've seen a number of different scenarios play out.
So they're common schemes.
And the traffickers are getting more and more creative.
Okay.
We've seen women and girls lured into working in Latino brothels, in Asian massage parlors, people who are working in the agricultural industry, and they may have entered the United States lawfully, but then they are forced to work in addition to what the terms of their contract permitted, abused, treated poorly. And so then it turns from a valid employment agreement into a trafficking scheme.
You know, pardon this, but you see, I mean, you drive along and you see these massage parlor things, and I'm married, so I just is human trafficking going on? I mean, you hear and it's kind of snickered at, but is human trafficking going on in places like that? And why doesn't law enforcement start targeting places like that so that they can help alleviate this issue?
Well, I guess
I asked two questions. Let's just tackle the first one. Are those the type of places where this goes on?
Well, I'm going to combine the two questions because it's actually a question for law enforcement.
Okay.
I think that we can't assume that all of these establishments in our city are engaging in this type of work. I think that I think that law enforcement is aware of it. Some of these investigations that they're engaging in, they span multiple months, sometimes years, and there are reasons why they are monitoring, but maybe not stepping in to break apart an establishment like that or to close their doors. And so I do think that it is happening across our city, but sometimes more discreetly and in ways that we as an average citizen would not be able to easily identify.
Yeah, it doesn't sound easily identifiable to me. I mean, I can just kind of look at it and think, oh my God, maybe it's those type of places that this is. Because when you started talking about it, I thought, oh my God, are those the places that this is happening? And you just drive by it and you don't ever think twice about it. And, you know, they're big flashing neon lights. We are at the end of this segment. So, Alpa, will you give them some contact information for GAIN?
Absolutely. You can find all of the information about GAIN and our work at www.georgiaasylum.org.
You're listening to Lewis on the Law. Once again, I got to throw out this legal disclaimer. This show is not designed to give you legal advice. If you have a serious legal issue, go ahead and contract with an attorney. You can always find attorneys on my website at jameslewislegal.com. If you have a property issue, I might be able to help you. A probate or property issue, you can always give me a call at 404-610-0075. If you have an idea for a show or you have a topic that you'd like to hear, go ahead and hit me on my webpage on the contact page. Or you can email me at james@jameslewislegal.com. And if I don't know enough about your topic to coherently talk about it, I'll bring an attorney on who actually knows something about your topic, and we'll get into it on air. When we get back, we'll hear more from Alpa, and we'll talk about victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. Heavy stuff. You are listening to Lewis on the Law. My name is James Lewis, and I have a great show for you guys going on today. I have attorney Alpa Amin on with me, and she is a director of legal services for the Georgia Asylum and Immigration Network. Alpa, thank you for coming on. We have got a really hot-button issue going here, and I want to stay out of the political fray no matter what we do, because I'm only trying to highlight your organization and the awesome work that you guys do here in Georgia.
Thank you for having us.
Excellent. And I want to let you guys know that this show actually not only airs here in Atlanta on Saturday afternoons or Saturday mornings, but we also stream nationally on Google, iTunes, Spotify, almost every streaming national platform you can think of. We are streaming, and we are also AI compatible. Alpa, we are going to talk about, even this show is so heavy. The topic is really heavy. I can't imagine working and helping people like this, but we're going to talk about victims of domestic violence and sexual assault in this section. So is that something that you commonly encounter?
Yes. So one of the two programs at GAIN is the Victims of Violence program. And therein we serve survivors of trafficking, domestic violence, sexual assault, and it's a bulk of our work. That seems
really emotionally taxing. I mean, how do you? Okay, so I'm just going to give myself as an example. When I get really embroiled in a nasty litigation situation, or we're talking about jurisdiction, we're battling it over, and that's nothing compared to the type of emotional trauma that you must actually deal with. How does that make you feel? How do you deal with that?
Well, I think the first step is to acknowledge that it is heavy stuff. We are dealing with people's lives, dealing with people who have experienced trauma. And so recognizing that we have to create a space that's supportive, that ensures that our staff that's doing the intake, people that are working with the clients directly, that they have access to resources to deal with vicarious trauma or secondary trauma.
That is amazing. So are there forms of immigration relief here available to people?
Yes.
Especially victims of domestic violence and assault. I think we'll stick with that.
Yes, absolutely. And that is what we focus on. Again, GAIN serves immigrant survivors of crime and persecution. And so for individuals who've come to the United States and fallen victim to a type of crime, namely trafficking, domestic violence, sexual assault, there are two forms of non-immigrant visas, if you will, that are available to them. And those are the T visa and the U visa.
And okay, so you got a little technical with me there. So first of all, what is a visa? Let's go ahead and just get to the basics. What is a visa?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's not, when we're talking about it in this context, we're not talking about permission or a stamp that's put in your passport that allows someone to come in and out of a country. It is a non-immigrant status. It is a way for a victim of crime to remain in the United States for a period of 4 years.
Okay, so for a period of 4 years, does it have to be renewed every 4 years, or is it just 4 years and then it's gone?
It can be extended under certain circumstances, but generally speaking, after being in that status for a couple of years, they are eligible to apply for their green card or for lawful permanent residence.
Okay, now you said T and U visas. Okay, first, what are the difference? What is a T visa? What is a U visa? And what are their applications? I threw a lot of questions at you, so we'll dissect those questions. But go ahead. T visa,
Absolutely.
U visa.
So the T visa is set aside for victims of human trafficking, whereas the U visa is designed for victims of certain qualifying crimes. And therein, we're talking about domestic violence, child molestation, aggravated crimes.
Okay, so back up. What was the T visa for again?
Victims of human trafficking.
Okay, so victims of human trafficking as opposed to victims of crime.
Absolutely. And for the T visa, the victims of human trafficking, again, are defined federally through the definition that we talked about earlier.
I'm going to make you give me these definitions again, because a lot of this is just, if this is going over my head and listeners are listening out there on the radio, we're going to have to go back through some of this stuff on the last segment again. Okay, but go ahead.
Right, absolutely. So to define human trafficking, we look to federal statute, and we're talking about the recruitment, transportation, harboring of an individual through force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of commercial sex act or labor services.
Okay. So is the intent really to create two separate categories? I mean, how are these created and what is the intent behind that?
For the T visa and the U visa? Well, and I think the two forms of relief were created back in 2000. And the idea was that we wanted to make sure that victims of crime knew that there were resources available to them. For many reasons, having immigration status allows for some stability, access to certain services, access to a work permit. And so Congress created these two types of immigration relief for that reason, to create it as a resource. But also, both of the visas require some element of cooperation with law enforcement. And so the second dual intent was to ensure that law enforcement had access to resources and they were able to build bridges with immigrant communities so as to inform their investigations and prosecution.
And that seems like that is a hurdle in itself, because a lot of times immigration communities, especially people who are uncertain about their status, there's a lot of fear involved.
Absolutely. Fear, distrust, misinformation in the community that prevents them from feeling comfortable coming forward.
How do you guys bridge that? How do you work with that? I mean, it just seems like if people are afraid, they'll just hide, even if they're in these horrible situations.
Absolutely, and I think that we've been doing this work since 2005, and I think our goal is to be as collaborative as possible with individuals and groups and agencies so that others know that we are available to help. We are working with law enforcement when it's needed. We are working with other NGOs that provide other services. So, for example, we may be collaborating with agencies that provide protective orders in the fair chance that they're coming across somebody who might be a survivor, who might need our assistance. So getting the word out, being more visible, and then creating the capacity to provide this service is really what we try to do.
Excellent. So what is required for someone to qualify for one of these visas?
So I touched briefly on one of the elements, but essentially they have to establish that they are a victim of a certain crime, that they are cooperating with law enforcement in some capacity, and that they're unable to return to their country. Depending on the TRU visa, you may have some different requirements, but generally speaking, it's this element of cooperation in the investigation or prosecution of a crime.
And that once again, someone would have to actually cross that fear hurdle or the distrust hurdle.
Absolutely. And as attorneys, I think we see our role as not just as an attorney, right? We're advocating for our clients. We are supporting them. We are informing them of what their rights are. Our model at GAIN is to take a look at the holistic picture. So it's not just the immigration issue that our clients are coming to us with. It's, do they need language assistance? Do they need transportation? Do they need mental health care? And those are the kinds of things that we are evaluating and connecting them to so that they can feel whole and move forward with the next phase in their life.
Okay, so how long does all this take? What is the processing time? I mean, someone steps forward, they're in fear, they're in a bad situation. How long is this going to take for them to get out of the situation that they're in?
Right. Well, it depends. So to put the application together can take anywhere from 1 to 3 months, sometimes more, but the processing times have varied and they have increased significantly over the last 6-7 years. So for the T visa, you might see anywhere from 2 to 3 years for a case to be decided on. For the U visa, you're looking at upwards of 7 to 10 years or more.
Are the people in these situations, are they given any type of protection while they're in this processing period?
So for the T visa, there is a protection if the individual has something called continued presence. If they are working with law enforcement, they may have an access to a work permit, access to certain benefits if they are identified by law enforcement as a victim of trafficking. On the U visa side, however, there is no access to such resources while that application is pending. So you could have somebody whose application is pending for 10 years and they don't have the ability to work. And sometimes what you'll find is that circumstance puts them back into a situation where they are vulnerable to being exploited.
Is there a significant backlog? I assume there is.
There is. So both the T and the U visa have annual caps that are issued by the federal government. And so there are 5,000 T visas available annually and 10,000 U visas. And so the U visas, the 10,000 visa cap has been met every year for many years now. And so what happens is if somebody isn't eligible or if they aren't, if there isn't a visa available to them that year, they get put on a wait list. And again, they could be waiting upwards of 10 years.
Now, how many people apply? I mean, you said there's a cap for the acceptance. So what is the application like? What are the numbers like? I mean, is it huge?
I don't know that I can speak to the number of applications currently, but they far exceed the number of visas available, right?
mean, yeah, that would make sense.
Right. But I think the application process is important to talk about too. Because a lot of times what you'll find is that if somebody isn't working with a lawyer, and let's be honest, and many people they don't have access to attorneys, and immigration attorneys and nonprofit immigration attorneys are even more scarce. And so if you're doing this application on your own, you might be missing certain forms or forgetting to meet a certain element, which can jeopardize your ability to obtain the relief. So we encourage people to come forward, seek assistance from an immigration attorney who can advise them on how to properly fill out these forms and submit them to the government.
Excellent stuff. So on that note, how do people gain contact with you?
So you can find our contact info and learn more about our organization at www.georgiaasylum.org.
You're listening to Lewis on the Law. My name is James Lewis, and I have yet another great, empowering, and informative show going for you guys today. I once again want to throw this out that we are not giving legal advice on this show. We are only bringing you information that may help you make an informed decision, may help you identify the issues that you need to address, or may help you find an attorney or a service that can help you. When we get back, we got a lot. Actually, it's the last segment, so we had a lot of stuff to go through, but we're going to talk about the impact of recent changes in immigration policy. You are listening to Lewis on the Law. My name is James Lewis, and I am your host this week and every week, and I have a great show going for you guys today. I have attorney Alpa Amin on with me, and she's a director of legal services for the Georgia Asylum and Immigration Network. And we've thrown tons of, and I have to thank you for being on. It's a great honor to have you here, and you guys do great work in Georgia.
Thank you.
So we have thrown a ton of information out to our listeners out there. So I want you to once again just kind of touch back on it all. What is GAIN and what do you guys do?
Thank you. So GAIN is a nonprofit organization that provides free immigration legal services to victims of crime and persecution.
Excellent. And you started differentiating between trafficking and smuggling. And what is the difference again?
Smuggling involves the facilitation of an entry into a country, requires a crossing of a border, and human trafficking is a crime of exploitation.
Okay, so a crime of exploitation. Okay, what does that mean?
Absolutely. So human trafficking can take the form of sex trafficking or labor trafficking. Mm-hmm. And so what we see in Georgia and at GAIN, we serve both victims of sex trafficking and labor. On the sex trafficking front, we've worked with individuals who have been forced to work in Latino brothels, massage parlors, and then on the labor trafficking front, we've worked with individuals who've been exploited in the agricultural industry, forced to work as domestic servants, et cetera.
And in the agricultural industry, that's where I can really imagine this actually happens. It seems like on the large farms, they would need plenty of day labor, people to actually work in the fields. And I don't know, do people work in the fields anymore? I'm so far removed. You know?
Georgia is home to a very large agricultural industry. And this is not to say that, many of those individuals working there are here on valid employment visas and agreements. And so but it's just when the situation turns from meeting the parameters of their employment agreement and exploitation that it turns into human trafficking.
Okay, and you spoke briefly on T visas and U visas. What were those again?
The T visa and the U visa are forms of immigration relief that are available to victims of human trafficking, domestic violence, sexual assault, and other qualifying crimes.
And how do people qualify for these visas?
So they have to establish that they are a victim of one of the crimes mentioned. And there is an element of cooperation with law enforcement in the investigation or prosecution of the crime.
And the T visa is what, and the U visa is what? What are the differences again?
Right.
I mean, we throw out so much information. I want people to kind of be able to come and talk to you coherently if they need to.
Absolutely. And I think, again, that's where our organization comes into play, right? We are trained to ask the questions to determine whether somebody is eligible for one visa over the other. But generally speaking, the T visa is for victims of human trafficking, and the U visa is for victims of certain other qualifying crimes, domestic violence, for example.
Excellent. That is a lot of stuff, and I think you were talking, and I think this is amazing to think about. But in the break, you were talking about human warehouses or warehousing or housing of people that they bring, and that would be smuggling. Am I correct?
Well, and I think that's the gray area, right, between smuggling and trafficking. A case can very easily turn from one of smuggling into trafficking. And there are a number of different...
It seems like they're pretty closely related. I'm like, how are you separating that?
They are, but trafficking can apply to individuals who perhaps have been in the United States, but have responded to an ad or have responded to an employment opportunity. and been exploited later on. So it's not necessary that there's no border crossing requirement for human trafficking.
Okay.
But generally speaking, there is a lot of overlap. And again, the case can turn from one of smuggling, where somebody paid someone to facilitate their entry into the United States, but then they weren't able to leave. They didn't have the ability to make their own choices. And they were forced perhaps to work off a debt in order to pay back that trafficker.
And I think those heart-wrenching stories you hear of people being smuggled and then families being separated, is that a reality?
I think that anytime you have people with limited access to, resources, to agencies that can inform them of their rights, you have people who are vulnerable. They might fall victim to any kind of ploy. Someone tells them that they're eligible for something, they might believe them. And so you run the risk of having young, uninformed people sometimes who are lured into circumstances where they are then exploited.
Amazing. So, you hear a lot on the news these days, and I actually try not to pay too much attention with the news because so much of it is polarized these days. And I am a person who's big on just dealing with life as it is, in reality as it is. I really am big on that, and so I live my life that way. So I don't pay attention to a lot of the hot button issues, but there's a lot of a buzz around the new immigration laws. So how much of that is fact and how much of it is fiction?
I think that what we focus on at GAIN is what is happening and how does it apply to our clients.
Mm-hmm.
And lately what we've seen is as a bit of a perfect storm, if you will. There are rapidly changing policies. There is a lot of misinformation and misconception out there. And sometimes what happens is before we as attorneys have the opportunity to digest the information, figure out how it's going to apply to our clients, that information is already out in the community, and that kind
but it's not good information though. Sometimes it can be corrupted.
Correct. No, absolutely. And so we want to make sure that we are telling our clients what's actually happening, how it's actually going to impact their case. But it is difficult when things are constantly changing beneath our feet.
And is that the environment right now that is constantly changing?
Yes, absolutely. So I think that we've seen a lot of changes in policy, issues that impact specifically victims of crime, where these are people who it takes a lot of courage to come forward, to report a crime, to come forward and ask for help to anyone, to sit across the table from me as a stranger and tell me their story. So I think that what happens now is that people are reluctant. They're reluctant to talk about their story, ask for the help because they don't know what the consequences of it will be.
That makes perfect sense. So are you seeing this as a big impact on GAIN and the practice that you guys do?
I think it cuts both ways. I think that you have people who are coming forward wanting to, secure some sort of immigration status because they know that being deported means not just being forced to return to a country, but also being separated from loved ones. And many of our clients have set roots down in the United States. They are eligible for certain forms of immigration relief, but they just don't know about it. And so they're just now finding us and seeking our help. And so we see that a lot of people are coming forward to seek out our services, but then you also have people who are afraid to continue to pursue them because they don't know that by filing this application, are they going to be jeopardizing the situation or running the risk of being put in removal proceedings, which is what we call immigration court.
And that seems like they're weighing the balance between whether this present situation they are in, whether it's a abusive situation, a trafficking situation, if that's worse than the situation they may place themselves in if they get help.
Absolutely, and I think that in many of these circumstances, our clients are told that they don't qualify for certain type of work, or they aren't eligible, they don't have the proper skill set. And so they're brainwashed into thinking by their traffickers, by their abusers, that they don't have very many options. And I think that that's where our organization also can be helpful, is to, again, inform people of their rights, let them know what they can do, what they're eligible to do, and then help hold their hand and walk them through that process.
So how is GAIN adapting to this ever-changing world that they're existing in?
I think we're responsible for, again, digesting the information, staying on top of the news, if you will, but really also digging our heels in deep and figuring out innovative, creative ways that we can support our client base. And so we're working with community partners. We're continuing our work with law enforcement and advocating for the rights of our clients as best as we can.
And so do you have new initiatives on the horizon then to adapt to this changing climate?
We have a few things that we're waiting to try out, but specifically, we were trying to find ways to engage attorneys in more limited scope opportunities because of many of the processing times that we've talked about. Some of these cases can take 7-10 years for a decision. So we're trying to find creative opportunities for volunteer attorneys to get involved in our work.
Excellent stuff. So give those volunteer attorneys some contact information. We're at the end of our show, so go ahead and give them some contact information. How can they be involved, and how can a listener who might need your services find out about you guys or get help?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So you can find all of our information about GAIN, the Georgia Asylum and Immigration Network, who we serve, what we do, and how you can get involved at www.georgiaasylum.org.
You're listening to Lewis on the Law. My name is James Lewis, and you can always contact me at jameslewislegal.com. You can email me at james@jameslewislegal.com, or you can give me a call at 404-610-0075. Once again, that's 404-610-0075. And before I go, I want to thank the guys who make the magic happen. AC over there, the guy known as the Cooler. That's right, our alternate current, Mr. Anthony Cook, our multimedia producer making the video happen, and our producer, Mr. Sam Davis, pushing all the buttons.